Welcome back to Al Jazeera. We're going to bring you some breaking news. The US President Trump says the border peace has reached a new agreement for the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza. He posted on Truth Social saying the agreement will be carried out in carefully structured phases. As armament is completed, Israeli forces will withdraw and the international stabilization forces will work with a new Palestinian police force to take responsibility for Gaza being safe and for its residents and its neighbours. This is a major milestone in the implementation of the Trump 20-point plan. Well, we can now cross to our correspondent, our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, who joins us live from the White House. Alan, thank you for taking time to talk to us so quickly, because this has come off the back of Trump's meeting with Netanyahu. He's been massively involved in this. What more do we know about the plan?
Well, let's talk about what we know and what we have learned before this announcement. Donald Trump obviously very keen to claim the credit for the Board of Peace. A lot of negotiation was going on with the Egyptians, the Turks and the Qataris. They were talking to Hamas. There had been some obstacles in getting them to a point where they were ready to sign on to this, but it was made clear that financially things were going to get much more difficult for Hamas, that funding structures could be scrapped. There was definitely international pressure on Hamas to accept this. Now, it was all discussed at the Oval Office when Donald Trump met Benjamin Netanyahu just a couple of days ago, but the Israelis expressed their concern. They said they were worried about how this would actually work, and they weren't entirely sure that Hamas would stick to the agreement. So this is going to be a sector-by-sector arrangement. As the sectors are cleared and disarmed, then more and more Palestinian police officers will be put to work. They'll work in association with an international coordination force, the makeup of which hasn't yet been cleared, but we've heard rumours that it could involve the likes of the Indonesians and possibly even the Turks, something that the Israelis might not be keen on, nothing that the Turks have ever confirmed either. And all of this will be overseen by Tony Blair. The intention is that Gaza will move towards the technocratic government that was promised in the 15-point peace plan to end the war in Gaza. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight. They're hoping to get a signing, hopefully within the next couple of days, but clearly there's a lot of work still to be done, and then there'll be a lot of pressure on the ground to implement this with the disarming of sector by sector using Palestinian police officers. That the intention is that they will be security cleared by Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence service, and then put to work. And also there will be a level of amnesty for people in Gaza to hand over their weapons and get some money. Of course, what they need to do is start the rebuilding of Gaza, and this is a first step in that process.
Well, Alan, sources have actually told Al Jazeera now that Hamas has agreed to the deal, but we're still waiting, obviously, for an official statement. Can you remind us then of the structure of the Board of Peace? Who's participating and to what extent they're involved?
Of course, this was Donald Trump's big idea that would run in parallel with the United Nations, and many countries paid up the billion-dollar fee to join and be part of effectively a lifetime membership. But as much as it's being dressed up as a Board of Peace initiative, this has really been driven by three nations: Egypt, Qatar and Turkey. They were part of it. Now, they are part of the Board of Peace. Donald Trump wants to suggest that his team played a significant part in that, and we will certainly hear that over the coming days, and we should get more details from the White House in the next few minutes. They're intending to hold a briefing call that will give us a few more details of what actually is planned. But clearly Donald Trump is claiming this as the first significant victory for the Board of Peace, which to a degree has been widely derided, because no sooner after it was established in a big ceremony here in Washington, D.C. at the Board of Peace headquarters than Donald Trump launched a war with Iran. And that is also going to be an issue for him as well, as he is concentrating on the war in Gaza and implementing the 15-point peace plan. People are asking the question, what about Iran, and are we going to get a peace deal there? What are you doing about that?
Thank you very much, Alan. Hopefully we will come back as soon as we get more information. Thank you for your time. But let's now bring in our colleague Noor Ode. She joins us live from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Noor, thank you for talking to us so quickly. Tell us then what has been announced. What sources have shared with you?
Well, Al Jazeera has obtained a copy of the draft of this agreement, and it really corroborates what the sources have told us already about the discussions that Hamas had given in a lot on the issue of disarmament, of handing over weapons and maps of tunnels, but that this would be in exchange for the technocratic committee, the Palestinian National Committee for the Administration of Gaza that the Board of Peace has set up, that committee would come into Gaza, would be the party that the weapons are handed over to, and that the Trump 20-point plan, which includes recovery, which includes humanitarian assistance to scale, which includes Israel withdrawing, not taking up 70% of Gaza, all of those things should be dealt with. And right now what we're hearing is that there was some understanding given by the Americans about what to do with the civil servants. Recall that Israel wanted to discard any official bodies that were in Gaza before October 7, did not want to deal with any of the civil servants, and this would have created a massive social consequence, a domino effect, if you will. What we're hearing is that there was understanding that those who are now part of the civilian bureaucracy will have their rights preserved in accordance with Palestinian law. So that means that they would either be retired or possibly redirected to other positions at the discretion of that Palestinian technocratic committee. The central point for Hamas and other factions was that they would only hand over weapons to a Palestinian party. They would not be handing over weapons to Israel, and that the entrance of this committee was necessary for the process to begin. They will be looking at measures taken to lower the humanitarian crisis, to ameliorate it, to make sure that humanitarian assistance is entering at scale, and that Israel no longer expands this so-called yellow line to include even more land, because the withdrawal should have been from the 50 or so percent that Israel initially had at the signing of the ceasefire. Instead of having that, over the past months, Israel has increased the territory it controls in Gaza, has continued to forcibly displace Palestinians. So they want to see that end. And there was a lot of public pressure building up in Gaza for Hamas to move in that direction. Voting for new leadership in Hamas probably paved the way for this agreement.
And Noor, just to add again, of course, sources have told Al Jazeera that Hamas has agreed to the deal. Again, we are waiting for an official statement. But as you mentioned, there has been a change within Hamas. We have now a new leadership. How important do you think his impact has had in the sort of the change we've now seen in terms of Hamas sort of, in theory, sitting down to negotiate?
Well, I mean, Hamas had a lot of tough choices to make, and none of them were palatable. None of them were the best-case scenario. Voting for new leadership was very important in terms of internal legitimacy. Khalil al-Hayy, who was voted to lead Hamas, is the father of four sons who were killed by Israel. He had the kind of legitimacy, the kind of sacrifice, if you will, that would position him in a place that enables him to make the kind of concessions that we're now seeing reported about this agreement. That was the thinking, that was the analysis domestically in Palestinian circles about the rise of Khalil al-Hayy over his contender to the leadership of Hamas. And now that this has been done, the implementation will be followed very closely. People will be watching for Hamas keeping up its part of the deal, but also to see whether the Board of Peace, the Trump administration, can deliver on its promises, or give Israel veto power over every step of the way, which they have seen over the past months. Remember, Israel was obliged to allow about 600 trucks of aid every day.
OK, we seem to have problems with Noor Uday. Hopefully we can reconnect with her later on in the show. Well, despite the US brokered ceasefire, Gaza continues to face an unprecedented humanitarian reconstruction crisis. Millions remain displaced. Essential services are collapsing. The Gaza Border Peace has done a situation report which has found that humanitarian aid to Gaza has increased by more than 70% since the ceasefire began. But the humanitarian needs remain immense. Approximately 85% of Gaza's buildings and roads have been destroyed or at least damaged. Gaza's reconstruction is expected to require more than $30 billion, according to estimates. The international community has so far pledged nearly $17 billion to support Gaza's reconstruction and recovery efforts. Well, we can now talk to Omar Rahman. He is a fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Omar, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Can I ask you then, obviously, this is just sort of breaking news. What more can you make of this statement? So Trump is calling this a major milestone. Do you agree?
First of all, thank you for having me, Hannah. It is a major milestone. It's not totally unexpected. I think we've seen, a steady or gradual set of concessions being made by Hamas over a longer period of time as nothing has moved. I mean, the most recent one before this was the dissolution of its governing structure in Gaza, and now we've gotten to this point. And it, based on what your correspondents were saying earlier and reading out in terms of how this process will go gradually, sector by sector, that's almost verbatim from the report that was given to the Security Council back in May by the High Commissioner for Gaza and the Board of Peace, Nikolai Mladenov. And I think that's the eighth point in his plan, where he discusses the kind of disarmament. There were a number of steps that were supposed to take place before this, including Israel abiding by just the very basic steps it was supposed to take under the 20-point plan, which is the surging of aid, allowing people to come and go across the borders, reconstruction to start happening. None of that is happening. And so all the concessions that are being made, all the steps that have been taken are on the Hamas side. And I think it's been reluctant to take those steps without Israel meeting its obligations. But as the situation just deteriorates and Israel doesn't move and nobody's forcing it to do so, Hamas has taken a further step by a further step in order to get the process moving. So that's where we are today.
And also, Omar, so what do you think the disarmament will mean in practice? You have hinted at the fact that there's a lot of good faith being shown from the Hamas side. But in practice, what would disarmament mean? Would this change now what was initially outlined? Well, I mean, again, we don't have a lot of clarity over the exactness or of what that term entails. There is provisions within that framework that Mladenov laid out in which personal arms are held by Palestinians. Obviously, a Palestinian police force comes in. The disarmament takes place between Palestinians, that's on the Hamas side, and those that would be part of a governing structure within Gaza. But, these weapons which Hamas has had, and it's used for, its resistance agenda against Israel, on behalf of the Palestinians, at this point, given the decimation in Gaza, the destruction of Gaza, the genocide faced by the people of Gaza, these weapons aren't really providing, much deterrence to Israel. They're not defending the Palestinian people and stopping Israel from carrying out its war crimes in the Gaza Strip. So at the end of the day, what use are those? They may prevent Israel from coming in and, arresting these members of Hamas and throwing them into their torture camps. But at the end of the day, if this is part of a process in which there's amnesty given and that kind of thing, and the international community and the Board of Peace can hold Israel accountable, which is a big if, because it hasn't been able to do so at any point along through this process, then I think, you get into this situation where you can start taking steps to bring a new governance structure to Gaza and allow people to move forward and start rebuilding and repairing their lives. And also, I was going to ask then, given that you mentioned Israel is massively important in this, do we know how involved Benjamin Netanyahu has been in this status of the big change in terms of Hamas recognizing or acknowledging in some forms of the border peace? And what impact do you think this will have on his upcoming elections?
It's a very good question. I don't know. We haven't heard from Israel since this news broke. I did hear some, statements from Mladenov a few days ago, thanking Israel for steps it had taken in regard to the entry of the International Stabilization Force into Gaza, but I couldn't, suss out what those actually were. We know that Israel has been demanding the disarmament of Hamas first, even though that's not the step-by-step process that's supposed to be taking place. But where that leaves Israel within this process, and if Israel is going to abide by the next steps at this point, God only knows. But so far, we've never seen Israel take those steps to be a part or a beneficial part of this process, a constructive part of this process. If anything, it's been an obstacle all along the way, as we've all seen, and the people of Gaza are suffering for that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the election, this could be an issue. Obviously, among the far right in Israel, they don't want to see a situation in which Gaza is rebuilt. And probably along a large populace of Israel, we know that the vast majority of Israelis support the, forcible transfer of Palestinians outside of Gaza. So how this will ultimately play in Israeli politics, I don't know. But, this is a process that's supported by the United States and the international community writ large. So how much, Israel can be obstructive in that overall process, I don't know. In terms of throwing sand in the gears, of course it can be. But in terms of, this plan of resettling Gaza and forcing all the Palestinians out at this point, I don't know if that's a realistic goal within the Israeli political discourse.
And yes, we are, of course, still waiting for more information. But in the meantime, he has thanked mediators, and you've mentioned them too, other international bodies who've been taking part, including Qatar. What will their role be going forward?
Qatar and all the other stakeholders have a huge role to play, I think, in keeping this process on the rails and moving forward. And unfortunately, we've seen maybe gradual or incremental steps taken, but really very little since this process was launched almost 10 months ago. And obviously there's been since February at least, and prior to that, a huge distraction, especially for the Gulf states on the international stage as they're dealing with this war in Iran and the implications for the Gulf itself. And I think that's distracted negatively against this process moving forward in Gaza. Hopefully that war and the kind of resurgence we've seen in fighting can be wrapped up soon, and people start paying attention to what's happening in Gaza, because it's an absolute catastrophe. But yes, the international community has a role to play. Yes, the United States is leading this process, but Donald Trump has shown that he needs kind of a constant hand of pressure from everybody else besides Israel in order to move a process that needs to progress for the people that are in Gaza today and are suffering.
And Omar, just before you go, I was going to ask you, this isn't really just about Hamas. There are other armed groups in Gaza. How unified will this plan be in terms of for everyone to stay on board and to essentially follow anything that's outlined?
It's another good question. I think it's too early to say at this point. But at the end of the day, Hamas was by far the largest militant force within the Gaza Strip. Its own power, we can't assess it 100% at this point, but its own ability to project force has been greatly reduced in the Gaza Strip. I don't think it has the power to do much and threaten Israel. I think Israel makes a big deal about the threat that Hamas poses at this point, but it does it for its own interests. And I don't think that's a threat that Hamas actually has at this point. And probably a good reason why it's also willing to give up the arms it does have, because it's not able to do much with those arms. And so the other groups that are in Gaza probably have much less ability to project force. Are they willing to give up their arms? Still, that's a hitch. When it comes to disarmament and somebody going in there and taking those guns away. Obviously, that can create tensions. There can be violence. But I think if Hamas is leading the way on that, likely other groups will follow. I'm not positive in that sense, but that's just an educated guess at this point.
OK. Omar Rahman talked to us there from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for your time. Omar is a fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs. Thank you. And we can now head back to our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, who joins us live from the White House. So, Alan, you've been listening to the White House briefing that's just been provided on this matter. Tell us more that you found out.
That briefing being provided by senior US officials and members of the Board of Peace. They are saying that this took some time to accomplish, but they wanted to make sure they got it right. They wanted to give Gaza something different and create a new economy. That's why it's taken 8 months. One of the first steps, they said, was to create a framework around the plan and work towards that. And one of those frameworks, one of the points in that, was to make sure that they deprived Hamas of any funding. So they changed the way that aid was being sent into Gaza, so that, in their view, Gaza could not be used by Hamas to raise money for the distribution of aid. They also changed the way that money was changed on the Strip as well, effectively drawing out, taking away Hamas's fundraising ability. Since then, they've been working on creating an international stabilization force. That will be put in place. A number of countries have already signed up to that, and they will be supported by a new Palestinian police force. Effectively, what the US officials are saying, finally, there is now an alternative to the PA, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. They didn't want to go back to a bad situation. And what they have done here is try to create something that will avoid future wars. They also said that the ideas for Gaza united the Arab world, that there was some concern from the Israelis that the Turks, the Qataris and the Egyptians were leading the negotiations, but they said that they were very focused on making sure they could get a deal in Gaza, and that was hugely important. And they have built a functioning plan that this will, they hope, sustain in years to come. They're talking as well about how those who are involved in Hamas, they will be able to give up for an amnesty. They won't be hunted afterwards. There will be an amnesty on weapons as well. More details, obviously, to be worked out. There's a great deal of fine detail in this, but that is the initial stages of the briefing that's been given by US officials and Board of Peace officials as well.
And Alan, how big of a win is this for Trump, especially in the middle of the sort of so-called Iran war conflict? Now, also, I need to remind that sources have told Al Jazeera that Hamas has agreed to the deal. Again, we are waiting for an official statement. But how much of a win do you think this is for President Trump at the moment?
Well, I think the fact that he put it out on Truth Social is kind of a victory lap, and that wouldn't have happened without the buy-in from Hamas. That has been a difficulty for them, but it appears that Hamas has, just in the last several hours, agreed to the deal. Certainly Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to Donald Trump about it when he was in the Oval Office. He raised several concerns. There is now this final agreement. Donald Trump will see this as a big win. They would like it to have happened sooner. As they said, it's taken 8 months since the ceasefire to get to this point. But the fact is they have got to this point, and they believe that this will create a different kind of Gaza, one built on capitalism and entrepreneurship. It will encourage people to run their own businesses. It will encourage other countries to get involved in funding firms, companies, all sorts of things there. That may be a much longer term goal. Initially, what they have to do, of course, is to effectively demilitarize Gaza, and they will do that sector by sector. Who knows how long that could take, but it might not be an easy prospect. What is interesting is the US and Board of Peace officials were also saying it took a change in Israel's approach as well. In the past, when there had been tensions with the ceasefire, when there had been issues with the ceasefire, they responded by trying to choke off Gaza. They wanted to make sure that that didn't happen, that Hamas was being punished and not the ordinary people of Gaza. And they believe that this will be something that they'll look at going forward and saying that this has been achieved. That briefing still ongoing as we speak.
Alan Fisher talked to us there live from Washington. Thank you very much, Alan. I'm sure we're going to chat very soon in the next couple of hours. Well, the Board of Peace initiative has drawn praise from Trump's allies, but also been criticised by countries who worry it will undermine the United Nations. Here's Noor Ode again to explain all of this.
The Board of Peace is supposed to oversee the enforcement of the Gaza ceasefire and reconstruction, and it will be in charge of the bodies responsible for implementation. Opinions have diverged on the board and its mission after invites were extended in January. France, Spain, Norway, and others cited concerns about the board's charter, which suggests it would extend its reach beyond Gaza. They fear it's an attempt to replace the United Nations. Germany and Italy opted out for constitutional reasons, namely that U.S. President Donald Trump would be chairman for life and have the final say on all matters. The UK put off membership after objections to Russia's invitation. Moscow and Beijing received invites but have yet to respond. Trump rescinded Canada's invitation after the Prime Minister objected to his plan to annex Greenland. The UN and Palestine were not invited. Arab and Muslim countries that accepted the invites did so on the condition that the board sticks to its mandate of stopping Israel's genocide and rebuilding Gaza. But Israel was invited, even though it's being charged with genocide in Gaza, and the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for its prime minister. Membership of the board is only 3 years, unless countries pay $1 billion. So far, no state has pledged that amount.
We can actually talk to Noor on the line, who joins us live from Ramallah. Noor, you've been looking now at the draft deal. Walk us through what you have observed.
Well, what's noteworthy, I think, are a few things that Hamas wanted to discuss and seem to have been included now following these intense rounds of negotiations that we have been following, led by Qatar, Türkiye, and Egypt. And what we see are stipulations that the technocratic committee set up by the Board of Peace would be not just in charge of keeping the peace, of law and order, but also preventing any act of revenge. Again, the bureaucratic civil servants would also be safeguarded. They would not be pursued. They would not be persecuted. They would not be denied their legal rights under Palestinian law. And this is important because there was a lot of talk about the Board of Peace coming in and dealing with Gaza as a clean slate, as if there were no laws, as if they did not belong to the larger Palestinian polity, as if they didn't have any foundations, legal foundations for all matters. And it seems that that has been at least partially bypassed. The technocratic committee would take over gradually, but it would do so with a police force that has been training and would be vetted by Israel. So Israel does have a veto on who can police in Gaza and who can't, and that weapons would be handed over to that Palestinian technocratic committee. Hamas insisted on including provisions that talk about adherence to the protocols agreed on and to the Trump plan, which include things that Israel has never respected since the beginning of this so-called ceasefire, namely the entrance of humanitarian assistance at scale, 600 aid trucks to be exact, in line with the ceasefire that was implemented in January of 2025. We'll have to see if Israel is willing to live up to that. And then there would be gradual Israeli withdrawal as the technocratic committee takes control of those areas in Gaza. All of this really hinges on the fact that Israel still has the power to sabotage, has the power to veto, to say that it's not satisfied, and that is the concern. But Hamas wanted to take all measures to show people who were growing increasingly frustrated, who still suffered from acute malnutrition and food insecurity, that it's doing all it can to change the situation, to strip Israel of any excuse. And we've seen statements from Hamas leaders and people affiliated with the movement leading up to this announcement, preparing the ground for it, talking about the importance of saving the people, and that would be the most important part of it all. And of course, that this has to be part of a credible process towards ending the occupation, something that the Trump administration and that the Trump Truth Social didn't talk about, and something that would surely irk the nerves, not just of Hamas, but even of the debilitated Palestinian Authority here in Ramallah.
And Noor, you obviously talked about the huge humanitarian situation in Gaza. Has there been a timeline announced as to how quickly food could get in now?
Well, no, there is no timeline. The only timeline that I see in the draft is that a timetable for the implementation of the process would be submitted within 14 days. Remember, humanitarian aid had to enter Gaza at scale from day one, and from day one, Israel did not respect that. This was not related to disarmament. It was not even related to the entry of the technocratic committee formed by the Board of Peace. But again, here we are, kind of fudging the lines again for the sake of moving things forward, and it will take a lot of political pressure from the Trump administration to push Israel in that direction, because this is not a deal that Israel wanted to enter into. And even before this announcement, we heard from the Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, saying that there would be no agreement with what he described as Nazis. Only the gun barrels would be speaking to them, he said. We heard even from an opposition figure like Avigdor Lieberman, who served as a Minister of Defense in a previous government, saying that any deal with Hamas, anything that would talk about reconstruction, would be a disaster. Reconstruction, of course, is a long way away. In Gaza, we still have to talk about recovery, about making sure that people are not malnutrition, about having enough tents to house the predominantly displaced population. Those are the many steps that the mediators, Hamas, the population in Gaza, everybody else who wants to improve the situation, those are the baby steps that people would be looking for until the technocratic committee takes control of at least one sector of Gaza and successfully completes the process of receiving the arms from Hamas and giving clemency to those who've handed over weapons. And there were a lot of formulas that were being discussed. I remember one of the things that Tony Blair talked about was the Northern Ireland model, where people would hand in their weapons and receive compensation in exchange for that. And Hamas wanted to make sure that if Hamas members give up their weapons, they would have clemency from Israeli assassination, but also that measures would be taken to control any opposition, any people who wanted to commit acts of revenge or civil disorder against former Hamas officials once they were completely stripped of any means of protection.
And yes, Ode, you mentioned sort of Israeli political angle, but also what about the Palestinian political angle? Have we had any response, for example, from Fatah or the Palestinian Authority on this?
Well, it's 2:30 in the morning, local time right now, so we have not heard any official statements, not from Fatah or Hamas or the Palestinian Authority for that matter. We do know that in the days leading up to this announcement by the U.S. president, we heard from several leading Palestinian political figures saying that progress in this on this front, that Hamas concessions would be welcome, and that this is something that the Palestinian people need. Now, the Palestinian Authority would be looking for messages, for clues from the Trump administration that this agreement does not mean that it is alienated. The kinds of comments that we heard Allen report from Washington, quoting a senior U.S. official about an alternative to the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, will be troubling for people here in Ramallah, because the end goal for Palestinians, regardless their affiliation, is that they would have one government ruling over them in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, and that there would be a credible process to end the occupation of the occupied territory and to have a Palestinian state. Now, the Trump plan does not talk about statehood. It talks about a credible path. If that credible path means changing the Palestinian political system altogether and replacing it with something that Trump would appoint, then that would unnerve all political actors in the Palestinian scene, regardless their affiliation.
Noor Odeh talking us there live from Ramallah. Thank you very much, Noor. A US official has told reporters at the White House that Washington believes the new security framework has helped unite Arab countries behind a new plan for Gaza. He said there was a lot of criticism, particularly in Israel, when we invited Türkiye and Qatar to join the Board of Peace. Right now, there is finally an alternative to the Palestinian Authority and Hamas that is really a technocratic, apolitical government that is really looking to do this for the benefit of the people.